For Sgt Koepp here with Company D, 2nd United States Sharpshooters, and thanks again for joining us in the workshop. Today we have another exciting build, how to make a Civil War ammunition box. Now, for complete written instructions, once again, I highly recommend A.J. Hamler's Civil War Woodworking Volume 1. Also in this video, I'm not going to spend as much time going over general construction methods. If you have any questions about that, be sure to check back on our earlier videos, such as how to make a Civil War hardtack box and our FARB rehab video. This right here is an example of a box that I made about a year ago. This is a 52 caliber Sharps box, since we are the sharpshooters. And this I have actually converted into my rifle cleaning kit. I got a nice little pull-out tray. These boxes can be very versatile to fit all your needs and store your sundries or anything else that you want to keep out of the eyes of the public, or just to kind of help you move from event to event. This is a Union box, so most of the Union ammunition boxes would have been painted a dark olive green. If you are curious about the exact paint formula, you can find it in the 1861 Ordnance Manual. This is about as close as I could find, and it works pretty good. Confederate boxes were generally unpainted, though some were, and there are plenty of examples. So make sure you do a little bit of research if you have a specific impression in mind as you build and paint your ammunition box. As far as stencils, this was one that was really difficult. I couldn't find any Sharps ammunition labels available on the internet, and with the help of Captain Whitehall, I designed and created our very own ammunition box based on what little information was available. If you are looking to make a Sharps ammunition box, we have the stencil available for free on our website at secondusss.com. A.J. Hamler also has a couple of free stencils on his website, and I'll be sure to have that link down in the description for you. To get started on making your own ammunition box, you're going to need to go to the hardware store, lumberyard, and get a couple of 1x8 by 8 foot pine boards. Once again, you're going to want to look for the clearest boards that you can, and you're going to want to cut and rip them to the proper dimensions. So to get started, the ends of the box are going to be 6 3/8 inches by 12 1/4 inches. The sides of the box are going to be 6 3/8 inches by 16 1/4 inches long. And for the bottom, just like in the hardtack box video, for the tops and bottoms, I cut them a little bit long, so that way I always have enough wood to perfectly fit the lid and the base of the box afterwards. So these ones I cut long, about 16 3/8, and I did not rip them to their final width. So these are just straight 1x8s that I cut to 16 3/8, and then I tongue and grooved the boards as the originals would have been. And for this, I used my tongue and groove plane. Lots of different ways you can do it. But one thing I want to point out is, you know, starting out, if you don't have a lot of tools, if the tongue and groove is what you think might keep you from making an ammunition box, don't stress it. You can edge glue your lid and your base together. It would be fine. It's not going to be, you know, the strongest in the world, but it's also not going to be the weakest. Sure, you might lose a point or two for historical authenticity, but once the paint's on, most people are never going to notice. So don't be afraid to try to tackle this project with the tools and experience that you have. So you're going to, like I said, you're going to need 4 boards, 16 3/8 or however long. If you do it exactly like the book, the top and the bottom once again would be 16 1/4 because it's the length of the sides. So 2 boards for the lid and then 2 boards for the base. So let's get reset up and I'll show you how to lay out the joinery. The joinery layout for this project is pretty straightforward. I highly recommend having a marking gauge. It has a little cutter, and then to find the depth of your box joints, you set your marking gauge to the thickness of the board, and using the fence, you scribe your line across the board. And without having to measure or having to worry about the variance and the thicknesses of the boards, you know that because this was set to this board, the joints will be at the correct depth every time. So then you just go around and you do that for all the rest of the boards. Now, once you have this laid out, I like to start on the long sides first, and the joints are going to be, for the most part, 1 1/4 inches. So there we have 1 1/4 inches, and then we're going to square that line. Now, at this point, you might be wondering, why am I using the precision of a marking gauge and the inaccuracy of a pencil? Well, the reason is when you cut your first joints, the accuracy isn't so important. It's the mating boards where the accuracy is going to be really necessary, because we fit those boards to these ones. So we can make up for it a little bit. And then I like to kind of go back and forth a little bit. And since this board doesn't divide evenly, and then we just kind of keep inching our way in, and then the last part will make up the difference. So the center joint will be a slightly different size. Now at this point you want to pay close attention, because you want to make sure that you cut out the right pieces. So on the sides, you keep the first pin, tail, then this is waist. Keep this one, and then this one is waist. Now, I don't mark the second side piece, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold these together with some double stick tape, and then I'm going to cut them together at the exact same time. So all I have to do is flip the board around and do the same thing, and then we're ready for cutting. Now we're ready to cut our first set of box joints. I'm doing this on my table saw. AJ Hammer used his band saw, and you can also just use a coping saw and a bench chisel to do this very same thing. I have my miter gauge set up on my table saw with a sacrificial fence. I have my dado stack installed and set to the height of my scribe line, and now all I have to do is make repeated passes to remove that unnecessary material. Now, if you want to do this on the table saw, but maybe you don't have a dado stack, that's fine. You can use a single blade. It'll just take longer. The important thing though is when you're cutting joinery with a table saw blade, you want to make sure that the blade that you have is a flat tooth ground. Now, most like combination blades, the cutting profile will be something like this. And it's going to leave peaks and valleys in your cut. It'll remove the material, but it won't give you a clean, flat surface. So if you use just a standard blade, you're going to have some cleanup to do with a bench chisel afterwards. So whether it's a standard rip blade or a dado stack, just make sure you really go for that flat tooth ground. So eyes, ears, dust, let's get started. Now we have our first round of box joints cut out. It's now time to take a minute and lay everything out and start labeling where all the parts will go. Because as we start laying out the next stage of joinery, each section will only go to that section. So you got to keep that in mind. But I wanted to show you here that you have to put a little bit of thought into where you mark your boards so you don't make a common mistake. So here I have 1 and 1 and I have 2 and 2. But on these end pieces, see how I put the 2 right here on the end? Well, when I go to the table saw, that is going to be cut off and I'm going to lose my number. So you need to make sure that when you mark your boards, you're not going to mark them any place that is going to get cut off in the joinery process. Now I'm ready to start marking the joint locations for my end pieces. And you can see I have it in my vise and I have the side resting on my bench plane. And I'm going to make sure I line up my edges so they're nice and flush, that the joint line matches the thickness of the board. And I'm going to use my marking knife to mark the sides of these box joints. Now go gentle at first because end grain sometimes likes to pull your marking knife. There. Now the rest of this, believe it or not, can be drawn out with a pencil. The reason why I use a marking knife is because I always leave plenty of meat on these end joints so I have a really nice snug fit. But if I ever have to trim any material, I now have a knife wall where I can set my chisel in to get a nice square clean cut on the maximum amount. So now I'm going to raise this up a little bit and then I'm going to take my square and draw a pencil line to mark where those go. And so now you want to make sure that you don't confuse what you got to keep and what you have to cut. So here I have a tail, so I have to cut this, I have to cut this, and I have to cut that. The other thing to make sure you have a nice tight joint is save your pencil line. When you're done cutting this, you should be able to see all of your pencil marks. It's better to have a little too much material and have to fine tune it with a chisel than to have not enough and have a sloppy joint that you either have to wedge or try to patch somehow. Okay, now that we have all of our box joints cut and we did a nice dry fit, if you have anything that isn't sitting quite flush, now's the chance to take your bench chisel and maybe clean up a few things. But ours is looking pretty good. I do want to say though, before you start gluing everything together, if you want to sand the inside of your box, do it now before you glue it and nail it together. I doubt these would have been sanded at all when they were originally made, but depending on what you plan on using it for, you may want to sand it. I know on some of mine, I'll shellac the inside to help it be easier to clean in the long run. But once you are ready to assemble, take it apart and put some glue in all of your joints. And then you'll want some 2-inch cut nails. And as in before, in our hardtack video, find your center and pre-drill some pilot holes for your cut nails. Remember your cut nails, the wedge goes with the grain. And so glue it, reassemble it, and drive a cut nail into each of the joint locations. So you'd have one here, and then you would have one here, all the way down. And then set it aside and let it finish drying. And then we'll start adding the base to the box. Our ammunition box is really starting to come together now. And since we were last together, I went ahead and cut the bottom to fit, and I nailed it on with more 2-inch box nails. Everything's been glued and nailed together, nice and stout. The other thing that I did was I went ahead and I trimmed the lid down to fit. So it's just, a fingernail's width over on all 4 sides. The originals would have probably been cut perfectly to the size of the box, but since these are going to be used a lot to get in and out of, I find that just having that little bit of lip really helps to get in and out of the box quicker. Now we're going to need to put some handles on it so you can carry this thing around. AJ Hamler sets his handles 1.5 inches from the top of the box, and so on the ends I'll take my combination square and I'll run a line at 1.5 inches. And I have found through my experience that the 1.5 inches makes for a comfortable handle location, as well as giving me plenty of room to paint my stencils on the ends of the box. Now, Hamler and I also prefer to put a 45-degree miter on the ends of our handles. It has the added effect of helping to cut down some of the sharp corners of the box, and there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of standardization as far as handle size, handle style, or handle placement. So you can have a little bit of personal preference in this portion. I've done 45-degree handles. I've also done square handles, and it works just fine. For the handle stock, what I do is I just take a standard 2x4 and I cut a couple of strips that are 1 inch by 1 inch square. And I'll start out by cutting my first miter on the miter saw, and then I'll work on my next part of layout. And since I don't like to measure anything more than I have to, and it also helps to make sure you have the perfect size every time, is I'll take my slightly prepared piece and I'll put it on my 1.5 inch line on the end of the box, and then I'll mark the back of the board so I know where my miter will end. You'll need to cut 2 of these, 1 for each end, and then you have another couple of choices on how you want to attach them. Originally, these handles would have been held on with a few nails that would have been clenched. Essentially, what you do with a clench nail is you drive an extra long nail through 2 pieces of wood, and then the end of the nail you bend around into a J shape and you drive it back into the wood. That effectively turns a nail into a staple. The only downside with that is generally when you do clenching, you have to make sure that you have extra long nails on hand so you have enough metal to bend around. And if you just make a few things and maybe you only have, say, 1.5 inch box nails or 2 inch box nails, you may need to order some slightly longer nails, especially as you get the hang of it. If you want to learn how to do it, there are some great YouTube videos by traditional woodworkers that demonstrate how to clench a nail. Typically, unless I'm asked to nail the handle on by a customer, I'll just line this onto my 1.5 inch line. I'll put some glue on the back and I'll clamp it, and the glue works great and it saves me a few nails, and I've never had any problems with the durability or longevity of glued on handles. While our handles are clamped up and the glue drying, let me set this aside and take a minute to show you how I set up the lid for the ammo box with all those great little historically accurate details. On my ammo box, you can see that I have what looks like screw hole locations. And this is going to be a lot like what we did for the hardtack box. The only difference, of course, being that the hardtack box was nailed on. So I wanted to make sure that I drilled some holes, and I left the imprint of the cut nails on the lid, so it looked like it was at one point held together with nails. There are a couple ways to go about giving that screwed on look of the ammunition boxes. They would have been held together by standard screws, slotted screws. And one way you can do it is just put your lid on the box and run your screws home. And that'll leave a nice threaded look and nice little dimples and imprints from the shoulder of the screw. The other thing you can do is you can pre-drill your holes, countersink them, and then cut the screw off. so that you have just enough threads to go to seat in the wood, but not enough to go through the board. And that way you give the appearance that the lid is still screwed on. If that's the way you want to go, that might be an idea for you. But I want to set up for the appearance that it was screwed on. It's a little more practical. Now, I haven't painted my box yet. I don't know exactly where I'm going to go with it. I don't exactly have a use for it right now. So if someone in the company is looking to buy one, I'll set them up. And but since I don't know if they want it hardcore, with just some cleats to hold the lid on, or if they want hinges, or they want a custom built modified box, I'm just gonna leave this board plain for right now. But when I detail the lid, it's after it's painted. So that way it's the contrast between the bare wood and the paint really stands out. That screws were removed from this box. But to show you how I lay them out and how I get them set up, I'll do that now for you on this bare wood. So let's get set up. Okay, now that we have our lid in front of us, let me show you how I lay out my screw hole locations. It's kind of personal preference where you put them, but the way that I do it is I'll put a screw at 2.5 inches in from either side of the box. And then that screw will be 3/8 of an inch up from the edge. And for the center screw, the only thing that's going to be really important is that if you tongue and grooved your lid, you want to make sure that your screw location is on either side of the tongue and groove joint. And if you just edge glued your boards together, you want to make sure that you do the same thing, because the last thing you want to do is run a screw in here and split your board open. So be mindful of that. Either side, it doesn't really matter. And once you have your locations figured out, what I do is I'll take a countersink bit and I'll choke way down on the drill bit. I'm not trying to drill all the way through the board. The way that I design my lids is I want to maintain the weather protection of a solid wood lid. And if you drill all the way through and say it rains on your box, that water is going to migrate through those screw holes and possibly into the contents of the box. So this way I get the appearance of historical accuracy with the protection of a solid wood top. So right there. And then again, it's just working a drill bit. There you have it. Your very own Civil War ammunition box, ready to hold your reenacting essentials. You have a couple of things left to do though. One is you're going to need to figure out how you want to secure your lid. The originals, of course, would have been just like this, screwed to the box, take the screws out, grab your ammunition, and the rest would probably end up in a garbage pile or in a fire pit. An easy way to secure your lid is by installing a couple of wooden cleats. And I explained how to make and fit those in our How to Make a Civil War Hardtack box video. So if cleats are the way you think you want to go, be sure to check out that video. Next, you'll want to paint. The originals would not have been primed prior to painting, but I start with a coat of latex primer, mostly because it saves me time and money in the painting process. Then after that, you'll need to add some stencils for your box. A.G. Hamler has a couple available for you on his website, and if you're interested in making a Sharps ammunition box, we have that label available to you at secondusss.com. We thank you so much for joining us for another build video in the Sharpshooter Workshop. Thanks as always for liking, commenting, and subscribing, and be sure to share up our video wherever you think people might like it. We'll see you next time.